once you go more towards the interior parts of the country, primarily like villages and smaller towns and the really rural parts and remote parts, you'll realize that education no longer remains just an education problem, but it is surrounded by so many other problems, right? Which in our language we call it as wicked problems. And the reason why it's challenging is because it's very difficult to have a very unidimensional solution centric approach, right? Because you have to have this overall understanding that
Today we're joined by Mr. Kshitij Anand. He is a graduate from Indiana University and IIT Guwahati. He is also the chairman of Happy Horizons, the co-founder of Karkeba Ventures and Suchak, and he is a guest faculty at various higher education institutes across India. The intention of this podcast is to spread awareness around education and the problems faced by its various stakeholders, such as students, parents, and teachers, and eventually to create a learning resource for said stakeholders. We're so glad to have you on this podcast, and without further ado, we'll get straight into the question.
thank you Priya.
So why don't we begin by you giving us an overview of the problems students in rural India are faced with?
So as part of the non-profit that I work, which is basically Happy Horizons Trust, it's something which me and my partner Vatsala we co-founded about 9 years ago. And the main challenge was to look at improving the quality of educations in rural India, right? And what we observed through our engagements and through our visits to these rural places were that the problems faced are probably very different than what you would probably face in an urban context, right? And the more interiors you went into rural India, the more these problems were like complex, right? So when I say complex, it's not just about education, because you start thinking about education as a problem because people don't have the food to eat, so there's a hunger problem, right? Or the fact that they cannot send to school, they do not have dresses and things like that, so there's an affordability problem, right? Or the fact that the parents are not actually working, so there's an employability problem. So there's like, once you go more towards the interior parts of the country, primarily like villages and smaller towns and the really rural parts and remote parts, you'll realize that education no longer remains just an education problem, but it is surrounded by so many other problems, right? Which in our language we call it as wicked problems. And the reason why it's challenging is because it's very difficult to have a very unidimensional solution centric approach, right? Because you have to have this overall understanding that how does malnutrition, for example, impact children who are poor in cognitive development, right? How does the fact that people don't have homes, uh, in times of adversity situations like floods and calamities, they just stop going to schools, right? Or the fact that people don't have the right food to eat, so often getting the meals and getting the children to drop out of schools and assist the parents to kind of get food becomes a priority area, right? So a lot of challenges which are there. Then also when it comes to the problem about affordability, specifically in the context of when we look at there's a lot of like budget private schools which have opened up. There's a lot of these schools which have opened up, which are saying that we will give you money, we will give you education, but at a certain cost involved, right? And that itself becomes a problem because not everybody can send their children to the schools in the private schools. And the ones that end up going to the government schools, there it opens up another back box of worms of problems, which start from, let's say, like low motivation to poor teaching quality to the lack of enough resources. There are so many schools that we have visited which are basically single teacher single classroom schools, but in reality they're actually grade 1 to 5 schools, and just one classroom for 5 grade of students, and probably either one or at the maximum two teachers, right? So there's a the lack of human resources, and there's lack of physical resources as a problem as well. So once you start going a little bit into specifically rural areas, you realize that the challenges are multifold and multi-layered out there.
Yeah, which segues really nicely into my next question, because you mentioned that there are so many different problems and it's not a single route that you can sort of follow as you solve these problems. So, how do you prioritize which problems to deal with first?
Yeah, I mean, like for us, we had to also look at the larger system, and in which we said that so there are certain things which the system has done. I wouldn't say probably 100% in the way you would want it to be, but at least it exists to an extent that you don't want to spend your energies into solving that problem. So for example, physical infrastructure, if we take the example, right now, uh, the government has set up schools, right? So there are these physical buildings that are set up out there. So it's not that we are putting our energies into trying to build new schools, right? Then when it comes to primary school, enrollment is nearly universal, right? So we don't want to spend energies into trying to convince children to come to school, right? So what we decided was, let's take the fact that schools are existing. Let's take the fact that there are children who are already enrolled in the schools, right? Then comes the question about how do we intervene. We started interventions with things like how do we engage children who have come to the schools, right? And as a process of engagement, can we increase the level of education in the schools? So we said we're going to focus in the school. We're going to focus on the children who come to the school, and look at working on engagement, because what we realized is that even though children come to schools, there is a nearly universal enrollment and people have been enrolled into schools. There is a lot of problem in the way children are engaged in schools, right? And if there is no engagement, there is a drop in motivation, and that drop in motivation often leads to dropout from the school, from the schools, right? So one gets connected to the other. So we said let's focus on the root cause, which is engagement, right? So we can start with engagement, driving engagement levels in school classrooms, and from there we built a series of programs around that. So that was our approach.
It's important that kids in school get engaged at the primary level, because then eventually that'll sort of persuade them to continue education at the higher level and get into the employability sector. Which brings us to my next question, is that there are already a very limited number of jobs in India.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, rote learning creates like this additional level of unemployability, making it very difficult for students in rural India to land decent, well-paying jobs. How are you dealing with the problem of rote learning, and how are you instilling real-world skills in the students?
Right. So basically, great point. Right. I think when it comes to the rote learning is a problem which I think has been widely accepted, right? And the fact that rote learning kind of prepares you for only a certain kind of career choices, right? But if you look at the world today, there are like probably many opportunities which probably will do without rote learning, right? Where you have to have not rote learning involved. And the fact that your ability to solve problems, your ability to probably look at how the whole how your adaptability is towards a particular situation, and that becomes important, where you're able to drive the ability for a child to learn, unlearn, and then relearn whenever required. Right? If you can bring in this kind of an understanding that whatever I learned today may become obsolete, let's say 5 years down the line, right? But then do I have the ability to then unlearn what I already know, learn something new, and then apply that new learning into the new job requirement? So what we believe as an organization also is that there is going to be a lot of jobs out there which will require problem solvers, right? Like creative problem solvers. You have a situation and you want to solve a problem. How do you go about doing that, right? So what we have tried to do is we have tried to focus a lot upon for example, if you look at our Suchak program, right, how we have developed it and we are developing it, it is primarily to drive experiential learning. Right? And what we believed is that if you have experiential learning, which as a student, if you're used to experiential learning, your first intent would be to actually experience it, and then find a problem, find a solution to it, right? So once you experience things, you remember it for a longer period of time, right? So no matter what you're studying, if you're studying, let's say, physics, geography, chemistry, history, whatever, if you can experience it in certain manner, the chances that you would remember it later on is higher, right? And the second part is not just experiencing, but then ensuring an applicability of the knowledge that you have learned, right? So can you apply what you have learned into the schools? Because then the information is relevant, right? So for example, I asked a lot of people, what was the reason why we studied, let's say, thermodynamics, right? Like a lot of people, we study thermodynamics in schools. But when I asked a lot of my peers in my industry, saying that, do you remember what we studied in thermodynamics and why we studied it? People are clueless, saying, oh, it was part of the syllabus, so we studied it, right? But then if you look at thermodynamics, they can be useful so many places in our day-to-day lives, right? Yeah. So when we start focusing upon these application areas of a particular concept, it could be physics, history, geography, whatever you can talk about, right? I think that can really make people at least open to learning, irrespective of the context that they are put into. And when they're in that frame of mind where they can, no matter what situation they get themselves into, they will actually learn based on the requirement of that particular situation, right? That is when we know that we have actually succeeded, right? So our goal is primarily to work towards that understanding, right? So we start with something as simple as a storytelling session. And we say that, okay, we're going to use storytelling, we're going to use activity-based learning, then we build that to project-based learning, and then we use that for entrepreneurship and experiential learning. So we kind of build the entire thing. Starts with storytelling, which is again not rote learning, but a very experiential understanding of a particular story. And then we build as we grow from primary school to middle school to high school, and eventually into your college life. Right? So we believe that education, if you have to rethink the entire education paradigm across the country, you have to start at the foundational years of learning, and then have programs which intervene at middle school, at high school, and eventually at your uh, college level thing as well.
And all these interventions and this sort of relooking at education requires trained professionals, it requires teachers.
Right.
So, in your experience, are the teachers motivated, ready to change, or do you have to go? Does the teacher training process require some sort of convincing, or are they intrinsically motivated? What's your experience?
Yeah. So two things on that front, right? One is like, so Suchak, our experiential, the teacher training and leadership development program also, right, actually addresses this problem very interestingly. What we have said is that there is teacher training which the CBC mandates for teachers, right? So teachers from, if you're a private school, it could be a budget private school or a like a well-off private school. The CBC mandates that you have to get your teachers to do the training part, right? And then you have the state government schools, which also requires you to take part in central government programs as well as state government programs for teachers training and upskilling, right? So in terms of your requirement, it's there. The norms mentions that teachers should be trained on a fairly regular basis, so because we have more new skills that are coming up, and teachers should be equipped with them because teaching is a very important profession, and people should be equipped to teach well. In reality, what was happening earlier was teacher would just take it for the sake of attendance, right? They would never really go and spend time in actually learning the concept, right? Because they would not know the application of that training. So what we started doing through our Suchak program was that we actually, every time we did a training module, we would have heavy examples of how that can be applied into the context of the work, right? Which is basically engaging with children, engaging with parents, engaging with other teachers, basically all the stakeholders, right? How you engage with them. So once we started putting those things together, then teachers had a better buy into it, right? They were able to understand the actual importance of that particular training, and that really helped us in trying to get more teachers involved. So we've kind of done training for almost like about 300 teachers, through different sessions and stuff. Had a very interesting thing because everybody talks about that we have been part of so many other training sessions before, but no one talks about the application part of the training. So for example, if I'm teaching, let's say, certain aspects of leadership, every teacher training program says you should learn on leadership. But why should a teacher learn leadership, right? Like, what is it that value that leadership really brings to their life, to their day-to-day life, right? And that really helps us to get the program better. So I feel that, and secondly, I think the schools are interested. Every school wants to create a differentiator, but then schools are not willing to pay. So there's that the economics part of it, which of course is about who pays for the teachers training program, etc., etc. For the government school teachers, the government mandates it, so people go and take attendance and get it done. But I really want to focus a lot through Suchak and through other programs that we do on the actual application of that learning. Right? So what we are saying is, can we go and do an assessment after, let's say, X amount of time and say that yes, let's go and assess what has happened and whether people have been able to apply what they're learning on. So that kind of differentiation, I believe that every teacher training program in the country has to start focusing a lot on the application and assessing whether that training did any good to the teachers or not.
Yeah, it's sort of like a test, but for teachers. As students, we have to give exams in order to assess that we are learning what we are supposed to learn and we are applying it where we are supposed to apply. So similar concept for teachers, which is very fitting, especially in a school environment.
Yeah.
And and all these programs stem from a lot of innovation and design. So you have a very strong background in design and tech. You work at Paytm as associate vice president of design, where you had design operations. So have you explored how we could use technologies specifically to help students in rural India?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of I think a scope is there's a lot of scope out there, right? Like in terms of what design can do in different contexts, right? I think that is important, and I think there's a lot of scope out there. What is important for us to remember is that when we talk about design, tech is only one part of design, right? So there are a lot of other aspects of design that can be explored as well, right? So for example, you talk about service design, you talk about the design for social impact, you talk about design innovation which are purely driven by people, right? There's absolutely no tech involved, right? So there is a lot of those aspects of design that also needs to be explored. Yes, technology is kind of a tool that helps us to scale, it helps us to reach out to more people. And technology is kind of proliferating across geographies at a very fast pace, right? So almost every village has like smartphone in India. Probably there's no village in India that does not have a smartphone these days, right? So and the moment a smartphone reaches, you almost have like people carrying computers, like small computers in their pockets, right? So the technology outreach has happened. Now it's a question of us to look at how do we design program that builds on top of that, right? So design definitely plays a huge role, because when you talk about design, it's about human centeredness. It's about making sure that there's a that there's an experience factor involved. The fact that there is something which you don't want to get users to feel like burdensome. So design has a very different understanding, and I think design will play a huge role, in fact, even a larger role in the days to come, where you're actually designing programs based on service design, based on people networks, based on trust, based on issues where I can trust a system which I'm a part of, and how much I want to contribute because I trust that system, right? So those are some larger challenges that I see designers getting into in the days to come, right? So technology is going to remain. Technology is here to stay. I know in COVID times we have had like a exposure to what technologies can do, but probably a still large part of the country is still like remained short of technology, right? Because people don't have access to tech and stuff. But I think it will keep evolving over a period of time. More organizations will start investing, providing tools. Whether it's your government systems or your private systems, there will be more intervention of technology. What remains to see is that we should not try to misuse technology, right? Because specifically when you're working in geographies which have low literacy levels, people are not as aware about technology and its misuses. There's always a chance of misusage of technology, right? So that's the caution that I would always like to bring in whenever thinking about technology.
Technology, design, all these things as we are going forward, it's a very trial and error sort of process to see what works with the masses and what doesn't. So I'm sure your journey must have and will continue to inspire many people to come forward and transform education in rural India. And I'm sure you've also gone through the similar trial and error process in seeing what works and what doesn't work. So, as other people try to come into the education space, what advice would you give to them? And if you were to start all over again, how would you do things differently?
Yeah, I think my biggest. So I come from a lens of systems thinking, right? So I'm a systems thinker where I like to look at the system that the larger system, which is your the macro perspective, the larger 30,000 feet view, bird's eye view perspective, right? And then deep dive into a bird's like a worm's view, or like the micro perspectives. What would I have probably done earlier better is to understand how technology can play a role. But then, having said that, I would also be cautious about the interventions with technology. I feel that technology can be a bane as well as a boon, right? So it's a bane when you know that yes, you can do so many things with it, but it's a boon the fact that you could do so many things with it, right? So there's always this catch-22 situation that you have with technology. So I think a lot of people, what they make the mistake is they start with technology first, and then try to design a solution around it, right? So my biggest word of caution advice that I give to people is that technology is there to stay. Technology will help out, but don't make technology the starting point, right? Make that as a means. Make the end beneficiary your starting point, right? So if we talk about user-centered design and human-centered design in the design world, so if you can start from that end beneficiary's benefit, right, that becomes your end goal, and you start with that. and then bring in technology, right? What people do is they first bring in a tech product and then say, let me, think about the solution, right? About the person. So that's one of my biggest thing that I would do. Having said that, we spend a lot of time, initially in exploring human solutions, which are basically non-tech oriented. I wish we could have explored probably tech slightly earlier in our journey, because we know that we could have probably scaled faster in what we're trying to do, not just in terms of getting children to use technology, but also just in our operations, in terms of our outreach as well. We could have used leverage technology a lot more.
So, here's a question I ask everybody who's on this podcast. What is the biggest flaw in our education system currently? And what major roadblocks and challenges do you foresee?
Yeah, I think I answered this question partially before as well, as per a question that you
Yeah.
mentioned, right? I always believe that, my biggest, I would say, agony with the present education system is that we don't focus on the application of knowledge, right? So I think any education system around the world which is successful emphasizes a lot upon the application of that knowledge, right? So whatever I'm learning, I could probably learn five things and know good application of those five things, rather than learn 100 things and not know anything about those 100 things, right? So I would rather focus on 10 things, because I know that if I can bring a culture of learning within that person, when the time comes, I can learn those 10 new things or the next 10 new things, right? But if I straight away try to crumple in, let's say, 100 things at this moment in time without giving you the knowledge about why you're studying it or the application of it, which is only possible to do it by rote learning, right? So my biggest problem has been with rote learning, and I think that's something which I feel we should all attempt to change, right? Saying that, can we focus more on the application of knowledge? Can we focus on more on trying to understand the why behind what we're studying, and what benefit it's going to have for that student, right? A person in grade 5, for example, may not know what they will do with that knowledge that they're gaining. So it becomes the role of the teacher, right? So that's where we actually introduced our teacher training program, because we, as much as we want to emphasize on experiential learning for children, we need education leaders and teachers who can drive that kind of a learning. So that's where the teacher training became very critical for us, where we said, okay, let's also train teachers parallelly who would also impart these kind of similar education for children in the schools as well. So yeah, so biggest problem I would say rote learning. I feel rote learning and the lack of application of knowledge, right? That's my biggest thing. To address it, I would say students becoming more experiential in their approach towards learning, and then teachers driving experiential learning. That would be probably what I'm working on.
And what sort of the biggest challenge do you see in reaching this reality, in fixing this flaw?
Well, I think like there's. I think the biggest challenge is the intent problem, right? And I've often said this before as well, that everybody knows that yes, it's helpful, but there's a lack of intent or will, if I were to say, right? Like almost every government knows that on SDG index we fall very short on education, on like women, girl child literacy, we fall very short. Everybody knows it, right? They have an initial intent, but then it's not a very strong intent or a strong will to actually make things happen, right? And these the challenge is that many of these things takes time, right? So it's not like a short-term solution. So people who think in policy, they always think short-term thinking. Let's do something, launch a policy, and things will get fixed, right? But in reality, any such kind of change is a long-term process, right? I think being able to work with that long-term process, where you're thinking about an initial intervention, its impact, you learn from it, find the new thing of its impact, and eventually over a period of a decade or maybe a couple of decades, you see the real results of it. Right? So that becomes a way for us to address. So as long as, and if there are enough intent and enough will that people can have, people who are in the the important stakeholders who have the high power and high interest, you can talk about government, you can talk about administrators, you can talk about the funders. If they all have the right intent, I think the change could be possible.
Great. That's all the questions I had for you today. If you have any sort of final closing thought.
No, thank you so much. That was interesting. Closing thought, I think there is a huge wave around edtech. Everybody talking about edtech. Technology is important, but I would always say let's try to think from a child-centric perspective, right? We all think about, if you look at the major businesses, right? Major edtech platforms, they think a lot from the perspective of uh, the content, right? They don't think about it from the learner perspective. So we need to become more learner centric and learner driven. and of course, understanding how we can apply those learnings, right? So that would be something which I'm really excited to. And I'm thinking the new wave of edtech startup that will come up will actually focus on the learner a lot more than it has been done before.
Yeah,
So that's it.
true. Yeah, it's been wonderful having you on the show. We're so glad you could join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.